So you know how everyone's always talking about aliens, right? Well, today we are going deep, really dark, into some of the oldest stories about contact with beings from beyond Earth.
We are talking about the Anunnaki, Elohim,
Yeah.
and all those names that keep popping up in ancient myths and texts like everywhere.
Yeah.
From Sumeria to Scandinavia, even the Bible.
It's wild, right? And for this deep dive, you sent over this really interesting interview with Clif High over on the Clif High Sci-Fi World channel on YouTube, where he's talking about the Elohim.
Right.
So we're going to unpack what he's saying about these beings, no dogma, no propaganda, just trying to understand what he's getting at, the surprising stuff, maybe even a little unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. What if history, like the history we all learned in school, what if that's just scratching the surface? Because you see these hints, these recurring themes of some advanced spacefaring group interacting with Earth, maybe even shaping us in ways we don't totally get.
And for those of you listening who, might have some pretty traditional beliefs, some of what Clif High is saying might be kind of out there. Just remember, we're just exploring what's in the source material you gave us.
Exactly. We're not endorsing anything, just diving in. And to set the stage here, Clif High, he doesn't really see the Elohim as doing like a straight up colonization, like, one country taking over another.
He uses the word harvesting, which is unsettling.
Right. It's more strategic and long term. He ties it into the Kali Yuga, like, that long cycle of decline in Hindu cosmology. And he really thinks there's been this like diminishing of human mental energies over time.
Diminishing mental energies.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And, one of the things that Clif High points out is this idea that there were ancient civilizations that existed for thousands of years with no signs of war.
Right.
Yeah, he claims that there is evidence, especially in northern India, of these really old societies, and they thrived, supposedly, for thousands of years. No war, no weapons, like he says beyond tools for hunting animals, right? No jails, no real systems of punishment, just like equitable sharing of resources, like childcare, food, all that.
Okay, so no prisons, no wars. It really makes you think, right? Like, was it the Elohim who brought all that conflict and violence to humanity?
It is a fascinating question, isn't it? And High emphasizes this really stark contrast. He says these peaceful civilizations, they had signage, meaning they had some form of written communication like a script, but no iconographic images.
Oh, symbolic art.
Right. He links the introduction of symbolic representation directly to the arrival of the Elohim. He thinks they brought that whole symbolic culture, maybe even as a way to, exert control. Who knows?
Interesting. So these peaceful societies, then along come the Elohim, and Clif High gives us a time frame for this.
He does, yeah. About 12,000 years ago.
12,000 years. And he connects their arrival to some pretty major, catastrophic events. Like, he talks about the intentional burying of ancient sites, right?
Yeah, he thinks places like Göbekli, they weren't just abandoned. They were deliberately buried.
Why?
Protection. High says they knew something was coming, this assault of the Elohim, and they buried those structures to protect them.
Wow.
Whoa, hold on. An assault, not just a metaphorical one.
Well, he suggests the Elohim might have caused the rapid freezing of Antarctica.
What?
It's pretty wild, right? He thinks there was a huge landmass between South America and Antarctica, and the Elohim destroyed it. This changed the wind patterns, created this vortex, that polar vortex, and bam, instant ice age.
So wait, you're saying that Antarctica, the whole continent,
Right.
was once tropical?
Yeah. And High believes that landmass, that's where Atlantis was.
Atlantis in Antarctica. That's crazy. So, okay then, what about Eden? The Garden of Eden. Oh man, High has got some thoughts on that too. He says it wasn't a garden at all. He goes back to the Old Testament and says the original word is more like gan, gans, or even gans.
They're guns.
Yeah. And he interprets that as a bubble, some kind of force field.
Like the Truman Show.
Sort of. And he even connects it to flat earth theories a little bit, but he says those are DOD disinformation.
Yeah.
But yeah, a bubble, not a garden. And the actual location, he places Eden in Armenia.
Armenia, wow. Okay, so we have the Elohim showing up 12,000 years ago, messing with the planet, shaping human history. Where does the moon fit into all of this?
Well, what's interesting is, High doesn't think the Elohim brought the moon.
They didn't?
Nope. He cites evidence of civilizations that existed before the moon. And these, astronomical alignments that were described, in ancient texts, but that wouldn't have been possible with the moon in the sky. He puts the moon's arrival way earlier, at least 250,000 years ago. But he does say, and this is where it gets creepy, that the Elohim might be on the moon now, or even inside it. Like they may have claimed it for themselves.
Okay, so they're on the moon, and then he brings up this whole human farm idea, which is like one of the scariest things he talks about.
It's intense.
Hmm?
He says that 8 million humans a year are being harvested.
Harvested.
Yeah, for some unknown purpose. Off-planet maybe, or in Antarctica, or underground, or maybe even, consumed. It's all speculation. But it really highlights his view that humanity is under their management, and not necessarily in a good way.
Okay, so we have all that, but
Yeah.
like, what are the Elohim? What do they look like? Are they reptilian? Because there are all these theories out there about lizard people and all that.
Yeah. Mai addresses those reptilian or Saurian theories head on, and he just says bogus.
Really?
He believes they're hominids. So basically, they could look exactly like us.
Wait, what? So they blend in.
Right. But he thinks you can detect them.
Detect them how?
Psychic ability. He says, and this is wild, he says they can project illusions. They manipulate our hormones, specifically by targeting certain glands in our brains. The hypothalamus, thalamus, pituitary pineal glands.
Well, hold on.
He believes they can, emit energy or something that affects these glands, which then releases hormones and messes with our brains and our perception.
So that's what's going on with all those stories about gods changing shape.
He thinks so, yeah. He also mentions this recurring thing about green blood. It comes up in different ancient texts. He thinks it could mean they have copper-based blood.
Copper-based blood. Okay, so if they're so good at hiding and they've got all this power, is there any hope for humanity? Like, can we break free from their control?
Well, High isn't completely doom and gloom. He thinks that humanity might be waking up, becoming more conscious. And he ties this to the end of the Kali Yuga.
The end of the Kali Yuga.
Right. He says, as that cycle ends, human intelligence and awareness is going up. So we might actually have a chance to resist their influence.
Interesting. But he also talks about how they've been controlling us for so long, and he really points to religion as a major tool of their control.
Yeah, he's pretty blunt about that. He says that religions, especially the Abrahamic ones, were created by the Elohim.
Wow.
It's like a giant mind control experiment, he says, like Stockholm Syndrome on a planetary scale.
And he has some pretty strong opinions about who's running the show here on Earth.
Yeah, he talks about this Elohim worship cult, which he says is Judaism. They're the ones that are keeping the Kali Yuga mindset going. He even makes some pretty wild predictions about the future of Israel and Christianity, all tied into this power dynamic.
What about the Nephilim, those giants from the Bible? Where do they fit into all of this?
He thinks of them as a failed experiment.
Really?
Yeah. He says they're a byproduct of genetic manipulation gone wrong, but not the reason for human proxies in general. He says they just modify existing life. They don't actually create new species.
And, he touches on some very sensitive subjects when it comes to different races and their origins. And he talks about genetic manipulation.
Yeah, this is where it gets really, really controversial. He says there was this, brown-skinned, short group of humans around 4 to 5'2", something like that, who looks kind of like Mongolians or Koreans.
Okay.
And he calls them the Asen. He says they were genetically modified to create Adam. He also mentions failed manipulation of the Khazarians. He claims it left a mark on their DNA, like a stub on their number 2 chromosome.
Interesting. So bringing it up to modern times, there's a lot of talk about UFOs or UAPs, right? And the possibility of official disclosure. Like, is the government going to admit they know about aliens? What does High think about all that?
He's super skeptical of this whole false flag alien invasion thing.
I've heard a lot about that too.
Yeah, but he goes even further and says that the rumor of the false flag, that's the real false flag. It's to make people not react appropriately when something actually happens.
Whoa. That's a mind bender. He also talks about specific people in the UFO community.
He does. He gives his take on Dr. Stephen Greer. He doesn't seem to like him very much. Says he might be a gatekeeper.
Really?
He's pushing this good alien narrative,
Yeah.
but High doesn't buy that at all. He actually has more positive things to say about David Grush. He thinks he's probably legitimate.
The whistleblower?
Yeah. But maybe he's been given, bad information or just doesn't have the whole picture. And then there's Tucker Carlson. High believes he knows some serious stuff.
But he's not telling.
Right, he's holding back. He also mentioned some interesting things about the military, from his own contacts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's heard that there's all these marine-based industries that are relocating.
Relocating? Why?
Because they're expecting something big to happen in the Pacific. He thinks it's a sign they know there's some kind of threat out there.
So what kind of conflict are we talking about here? Is this like an actual war with the Elohim?
He's really clear. This isn't like a normal war. He calls it a fight for our species' existence against human farming.
Oh, right, right. He's made that very clear. So the Elohim, they're powerful. They've been around forever. Do they have any weaknesses?
Well, High says they're not actually that numerous. And they mostly reproduce through genetic manipulation in those gons, those bubbles.
Right.
But here's the thing. He says they live for so long that they become paranoid and mentally unstable.
Wow.
And he even suggests that the Elohim worship cult, whoever they are, they might be screwing things up.
Screwing things up how?
Not meeting the Elohim's expectations. He says the Elohim are, and I quote, pissed about how things are going down here. And he circles back to religion, right? He really sees it as the main tool of control. This whole thing, Judaism, he calls it Stockholm Syndrome on a global scale. But here's where it gets interesting. He does have some optimism about the end of the Kali Yuga. He thinks we're getting smarter, more aware, and we might just be able to break free from the Elohim.
Okay, so we have to wait for the Kali Yuga to end. What happens next? What's the timeline?
Well, he predicts this huge increase in awareness. People are going to start talking about the Elohim concept more and more. And this will lead into what he calls hyper-novelty.
Hyper-novelty?
Yeah, like a time of massive, rapid change. And he thinks that within the next year, we're going to hear something official about non-human beings. Maybe not the full truth, but something. He thinks the military is driving this because they're, freaked out.
Makes sense. And he's not a fan of those interdimensional explanations, is he?
Nope. He thinks they're a distraction from the truth.
So any final thoughts from Clif High? Any advice?
He recommends a book, The Naked Bible, by a guy named Michael S. Heiser. He calls him like Marobiglino or something like that.
Okay.
It's supposed to give you a fresh perspective on the Bible. And he has some strong words about the Pharisees.
Pharisees.
He blames them for distorting our understanding of reality. He thinks it's messed up our ability to communicate with, and I quote, space aliens. He actually suggests these beings, maybe the Elohim or their buddies, they're not necessarily evil. They're just like really worried about what humans are doing.
Worried about what?
Nuclear weapons especially. He thinks the Pharisees are making things worse, that they're influencing us in the wrong direction.
Wow. That's heavy.
It is. So yeah, this deep dive into Clif High's ideas, it's a lot to take in. This whole idea of the Elohim being here controlling us through religion, the human farm.
Right. It's pretty wild.
It really makes you rethink history, and what's happening right now with all the UFO stuff.
So for those of you listening, it really begs the question, doesn't it? What if Clif High is right? Even if just a little bit. What if the history we've been taught, the religions we follow, are all influenced by these beings with their own agenda?
It really makes you question everything.
Exactly. And like he suggested, check out the Naked Bible, see what you think.
Do your own research.
Right. There's a lot out there. And we encourage you to keep exploring. This is just one little piece of the puzzle. We'll definitely be doing more deep dives in the future. So, let us know what you're interested in. Until next time, keep those questions coming.